Games.
Challenge everything.
The Sims product as a whole and the franchise is really about player creativity. As I said, the ability for the player to tell a story and to create the environment that that story exists within.
I think Sims 2 is just going to be spectacular. I think it's the ground floor of a whole new adventure.
It is so much more engaging and immersive because we've been able to increase the scene, the setting, the environment, as well as the Sims themselves.
It feels much more like you're in the room with these people, as opposed to watching them from a high balcony like it did with The Sims 1.
The Sims are turning from kind of two-dimensional cartoon figures into surprisingly real virtual people.
Where we've been spending most of our time and investing our effort is to really make them come alive.
For the first time, you actually get to follow your Sims through their lifetime.
Toddlers, they become kids, kids become teenagers, teenagers become adults.
The grandparents and the parents and the grandchildren, and that you have this interconnected family tree, and you can see those relationships play themselves out on the screen.
They get pregnant, they get buff, they get overweight.
They are more interesting to play with, more interesting to nurture and experiment with. The houses are dramatically more interesting. The environment is in 3D. It's more visceral. The neighborhood is bigger. You can have thousands of lots in there.
I don't want to say, oh, it's in 3D and that's why it's better, but it's amazing how much more connected players are going to feel to that world because you can zoom in and out of it and rotate around it, and it never disappears from the screen. You've always got that house that you've created and the characters that you've created, and you can look at them at any angle.
The Sims have huge egos because they know that there's millions of people watching everything they do.
Moki hokey.
It's a wide open universe. We're trying to make it really, really so much better and not lose the spirit of where it came from. We love this franchise. We want this franchise to go on and on and on. And we want everybody to keep loving it and keep having a great time and living their fantasies.
You will have to experience it.
I can make more mischief in The Sims 2 than I can make in real life, I think, but I haven't figured that out yet. Maybe it's a worthy ongoing experiment. On The Sims, it was a very long process for that game, and it was very hard to sell, initially. A lot of people didn't think again about taking out the trash and cleaning the toilet would be very fun. And so I kind of took the project underground, and we had a lot of different names for the project over the years. When I first took it underground and made it kind of a black box project, it was Project X for about a year. Actually before that it was Dollhouse, which I originally, when I first thought of The Sims, I called it Dollhouse. And I found that term didn't go over very well with teenage boys. Not well at all, actually. So I stopped calling it that. I swore never to call it Dollhouse again. And then it went to Project X for many years. Then it went to Jefferson, which was kind of a code name. And it was based upon Thomas Jefferson's, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was kind of the goal of the game. Then eventually it kind of reemerged, became The Sims and became kind of in a full production project, and everybody knew about it. But for many years it was kind of hidden underneath the storm drains. When you play The Sims or SimCity, or any of these sim games, you can't help but then go out and have a different perception of the environment around you. It makes you reflect on the internal balances you're making in your own life between, like, work and leisure, friends and family. I know a lot of women have written me and said that they put their boyfriends in the game along with them, and they see what happens, and then they tell their boyfriend, what happened in the game. And I don't think they expect that the game is simulating what will happen, but they're more curious to see what their boyfriend's reaction is going to be when they tell them what happened, when he was flirting with the next door neighbor. Well, when we started the company, my partner Jeff Braun and I kind of split up, and I was doing the technical design, creative stuff, and Jeff was doing the business stuff. And so Jeff decided we needed a name that, and he had like all these rules, and it was something like had to be between 5 and 7 letters long, had to have a Z or an X or a T in it, it had to be meaningless, and I forgot what all the rules were. And so we started brainstorming ideas, but then his father came up with the name Maxis. And then when we realized that if you turned it backwards, it spelled 6 a.m., we thought, oh, that's really cool, and we can use that someday.
There, you could show the strain a little bit when you put them down nice again. Let's leave a little space to let this run through just here. So you're happy, everything's great. Oh, happy, happy, little heavy, put down now. Space. Ah. So give her just a head nod space. You go again, Phil.
Well, it's you. Whoa!
Perfect. We're moving on to reject, and this is really fun.
Well, some people think it's risky that in Sims 2 we decided to go to black and white and stick figures, but we thought it just gives the player more room for imagination, and we kind of hope that some people will get crayons and start drawing on the TV screen.
The first thing you'll notice playing The Sims 2 is that the visual quality is just so much better than it was in Sims 1. Lighting, there's weather, reflective effects.
The environment is a full 3D world.
We've got foundations and decks now, which means that instead of having this really interesting topology and then having to make a flat space to build on, you can just, drag stuff out and build it. You can make that Hollywood house on the hill. You can make the house in the canyon.
You can do much more interesting structures. You're not limited to the same 2 floors. You can do much more, hillside developments.
Fences and real roofs and diagonal doors and windows, which sound mundane, but it's a huge new thing.
And all of a sudden, the world seems dramatically more colorful, more rich.
It makes it a much more compelling experience because you just feel so connected to what's on the screen and it feels so real.
Moki hokey.
To me, the most exciting part of The Sims 2 is how much we're putting into the Sims themselves.
One of the new features of Sims 2 is this very dynamic Create a Sim where you're actually going in and choosing the genetic attributes of your Sim.
Get in very close to the people, and they have much more detailed, smooth animations, which means we're able to convey much more subtle aspects of their personality and mood through their animation and their face.
With skin that looks touchable and gestures that have nuance.
The fact that they now have facial expressions, the fact that you can accessorize them, you can put makeup on them, all of that just goes to your ability to create characters that you believe in and can connect with.
When I was a kid, I don't know if anybody remembers, but there was a moment in time where wings were just all the rage. And so I got my hair cut in wings, and they were these really kind of horrific bangs that stood out like that. I then decided that I would perm these and ended up looking a little bit like a helicopter. My mom then tried to cut them to make this better. It just kept getting worse. I ended up looking as if I had this sort of starting of a mullet hairdo. And I don't think I lived that one down for a little while.
What would I change about my face and create a sim? Let's see. First of all, I think I would make my cheeks a little less long, and then I would give myself a little bit more of a chin, and I think I would also like to give myself some eyelids.
You could give one of your children brown eyes.
And I could give one of my kids brown eyes, because I got gypped in that particular department.
I started The Sims in '93. You know, I started a long, long time ago and worked on it kind of in the background for many years. But 2 years previous, in 1991, our home burned down in the Oakland Hills fire, and we lost everything. You know, I got out with a few pictures, and that was it. So from square one, we had to kind of build our lives back up. We had to go, you know, kind of buy a house, then buy furniture, buy clothes, buy all the, you know, buy a new car, all the stuff that had burned up in the fire. And it was interesting just kind of looking at the order in which, you know, we acquired things. You know, step one, new underwear, toothbrush. You know, step two, you know, maybe some new pants and shirts. You know, and then, you know, step three, you know, rent a hotel room, and kind of building your life back up. You know, and getting a sense of the materialistic basis. You know, and which things are really important in a minute-to-minute basis. At the same time, you know, we got out of the fire safely, and my daughter was elsewhere, and she was safe. And we realized how meaningless these material things were relative to our safety. And so that was just, you know, very interesting, that whole process that happened, you know, a couple of years before I started thinking about doing The Sims.
We're in the process of putting an addition onto our house, and my wife was having trouble visualizing it, so we actually used Sims 2 to design it so that she could look at it and understand how the space would lay out in 3D, that's when you really feel like, wow, I'm making something that not only is a game, but has all these other uses that you don't even think about. And I think that that's what's amazing about The Sims, is that The Sims, nobody plays The Sims the same. Every player has their own way of approaching the game and the gameplay. And there are people who all they do is build houses. They don't even turn on the simulator. They just use it as this kind of 3D architectural tool. But they can always flip that switch and actually see how The Sims are going to respond to that environment.
Over the course of a Sim's lifetime in The Sims 2, you're going to have them go through these life events. They range anything from their first birthday to their first job to their first crush or their first kiss.
The player is going to be taking the Sims through different strategic challenges at each of those stages, kind of those rites of passage that we associate with growing up.
And how you decide to play that as a player, how you take those first steps into a teenage relationship and that first crush, and when you might try to flirt with that special someone, is how the player actually impacts the life of their Sim.
You want good food and you hate eating bad food.
The people themselves have a lot more awareness, of what's going on around them. When somebody comes in the room, you'll see them turn their head. They might smile if it's a friend. They notice if these people over here are arguing. So that really brings up their believability several notches.
You're going to know when someone's a slob. You're going to know when somebody is really nice. You're going to know when somebody is really active. You're going to see that on the screen in the way that the Sims behave.
There are omelets, there's breakfast cereal.
They can react to things such as a spider being in the room that they might be afraid of.
They get nervous when they're near pink flamingos.
There's soup, there's turkey,
Another sim who has gotten into a bit of hygiene failure and is getting a bit smelly, they're going to walk by and just, whew, that's not good.
Uh-huh.
They got body types, you can feed them up and get them fat. You can put them on the workout bench and get them buff and trim. The way it happens is, the sim will work out and work out and work out, and he'll reach that moment, and then he'll get up and bing, and he'll be buff, which is sort of how we all wish it works. There's hamburgers, there's hot dogs. I think a key element of The Sims is things burn up. And in The Sims 2, we've got, lots of things that burn up and lots of new ways to start the fire and more intelligent response to the fire. Family behavior in the face of fire, which I think is important. But more importantly, it's an effect. In Sims 1, it was a sprite. It was a piece of art, and we'd have a couple of frames of it, and it would do this thing. It was very symbolic. And in Sims 2, we've got a much better fire.
Well, fire was one of our traditional disasters. SimCity, no matter what the disaster was, it always ended up kind of resolving to fire. If there's an earthquake, it started a lot of fires.
I don't do specifically flambe. I do basically, I burn off the alcohol in sauces. And I guess technically that is a flambe. I don't do a lot of decorative flambe.
I'm still in my first job. A failed off-Broadway actor.
I was a paper girl when I was about 10 years old. So Sunday mornings I used to really rue because the papers are so heavy and I had about 8 miles to walk with them, and I'd have to keep coming back to the central pile and get back out.
And a bored commercial fisherman.
What I did was I actually washed dogs for a living.
And a non-world-class writer.
Could be my last job. I like to get up early. I get up as early as I can. Sometimes it's 4 a.m., 5 a.m.
I make espresso at home, and I usually do that at the very last minute before I run out, and I try to get to work by 10.
This is my iced tea mug. Every morning I fill it up with about 44 ounces of tea and the rest ice, and then I drink it all day, and if it's a long day, then I fill it twice. But most people usually comment on, my God, that is the biggest mug I've ever seen, and I can't believe you drink that, and I'm sure you spend all day in the bathroom.
Sometimes stop at a well-known place, from Seattle where I can get coffee.
Let's see, wake up, take a shower, leave the house, stop and get my coffee and Mr. Muffin, which is very important. I used to always eat breakfast, but now I just eat a muffin, and now I eat lunch. I didn't used to eat lunch, and so lunch has kind of come into my life. Breakfast has kind of dropped down a little bit.
So I do fulfill my bladder motive quite a bit, I guess.
In the game industry, it can be extremely high pressure, and to survive in the game industry, you really have to learn how to pace yourself and how to look back and get a bigger picture on what's really important.
For me, this place is sort of a big idea kitchen.
One of the things that really unites us is we all really do have a passion for making games. It's something that is part of us, and it's something that ties us together.
I love this job, but I love cooking a little more.
Essentially, time passes in Sims 2, which it didn't really in Sims 1. And so there are days of the week and weekends, and so the player is going to have this sense of the clock ticking, but it's actually progressing. And the Sims each have a period of time that they're in each stage of life.
They have genetic code. They actually can have babies, and they're going to share those genetic traits over generations. So as you develop a relationship between two Sims and they have a child, you're going to see characteristics passed along through the children.
Siga mo, babasya!
You might have your kids grow up together, going to school together, become now teenagers, and then they, become married and have their own family.
What that means is that if you have a lot of kids, actually all going to be different and all portraying, their own variation of what the mom and the dad were.
They know who their parents are, so you're going to see the toddler following its mom and dad around the house. And when grandma and grandpa, who might live next door, come to visit, the kids are going to know it's grandma and grandpa and respond. So, run up and give them a hug. And we actually have something called grandma hug, which won't be called that in the game, but the idea is it's the kind of hug that a grandma gives her grandchildren. And so players are going to get that sense that the Sims know who their family is and can respond and react to them appropriately.
And so there's a family and a sense of connectivity between all those people and responsibilities between the adults and the kids, and also conflict, because as anybody who has teenagers at home or even kids understand that there are always a little challenge in running and participating in such an environment.
I'm strongly in favor of nature versus nurture.
The wealth and variety of Sims that you can create in this experience is just vast.
Ta-da!
Can I look at my license? Let's see. My name, William Ralph Wright. Ralph was my grandfather's name. I also had a boa constrictor named Ralph that I named after myself.
Growing up, my name was Loose Magoose, and that's what my dad called me, so that one stuck for quite some time.
When I was a caddy, the mean one-eyed caddy master, his name I forget, called me Bubba Bing.
My best friend when I was growing up always called me Will Kid. Several people in the office that call me Wilvis. I think I'd probably take after my father's side, because my mother is a very outgoing person, very verbal, and I'm actually not. I tend to be much quieter, much more reserved. My mother and my sister are both very dramatic. My father, who died when I was like 9 years old, I think was much more reserved and quiet like I am.
I take after my dad almost absolutely in looks. I mean, especially when I was younger, it was a carbon copy. In personality, it's a bit of a mix of both personality. However, I am most like my grandfather.
I think that I'm more like Maurice than anything else.
I inherited my looks from my two daughters. I have my younger daughter's eyes and my older daughter's feet, and my older daughter's height, and my younger daughter's irreverence. Unfortunately, I didn't inherit my younger daughter's energy level or body fat percent.
If you actually looked at pictures of my mom when she was young and pictures of myself when I was young, it's pretty much a carbon copy.
I am lucky enough to have all the knives that my grandfather taught me to cook with about 30 years ago. He and I communicated entirely through food, and I was his little kitchen slave. And at 8 years old, he had me, making a roux for him for his gumbo or his sauce or whatever. And he taught me, when I had when he was teaching me to chop, my chef's knife is now the knife I use as my paring knife, which is very sweet to me.
Quand je joue les Sims tous les jours, je joue à peu près 2-3 heures au travail tous les jours. J'essaye en général de prendre un aspect particulier du jeu et d'y jouer pendant 2-3 heures d'affilée.
I love to cook. I really do. I love everything about cooking. I love the cleaning up. I love the setting up. I love the cooking. I love the eating. I love how people are around food they like. I think actually that's my favorite part, is the feeding of other people.
I grew up in the South, became very partial to seafood, especially Cajun, like jambalaya is my favorite.
One morning I woke up and I had tortellini in my hair, and that's all I'm going to say about that particular, that evening.
They're making fun of me over there.
A speed and a feed and a fly, a hoot and a fleet and a fly.
Sure enough, I plopped myself down about 11 p.m. and the next time I looked at my watch, it was 5 a.m.
If my Sims were a soap opera, I would win a Daytime Emmy because there's so much drama going on in my Sim world.
I like that in Sims, like, you can do whatever you want.
I'd create a person, a Sim, and I'd make their little home to the best that I could with the money that was allotted to me. And I'd have them get married, and it is tough to get married on The Sims. It takes work. You have to feed the people, keep them happy, you know, la la la.
Yeah, I recently made a family where a guy married a girl, then I had him marry another girl, and I have the two wives fight with each other because they get jealous.
Yeah, well, we were starting to do this thing where I made my character and I lived down the street from her character.
Like, I love having two women get into like a fist fight. It's so funny.
And I would come and bring her character flowers and chocolate and all this stuff and try to put the moves on her character.
I think it's sort of cool to like make a husband and wife, like make the like husband like 20 years old and the wife like 80 years old, and then you see them like make out and everything. It's so funny.
And then I'd marry another one.
I was definitely one of those who did not realize that you need to learn how to cook in order to operate the stove.
The stove will catch on fire, and then slowly, panel by panel, the floor will catch on fire.
So, there were a few fires until I figured that one out.
And the people won't know what to do, so they'll just stand there screaming, and then eventually they'll catch on fire.
I think you do look at the real world a different way. I think you start putting the real world into a Sims context. I guess if you play it too much, you start clicking on people.
I think there are a lot more things in The Sims that I would like to have into my own personal life.
You start realizing that actually The Sims does a really good job of replicating the real world. That, people do that, and my Sims do that too.
And since I can't make the money myself in the real world, my Sims have to make it.
The Sims actually got me more into interior design, and I was studying architectural stuff last semester at school. I was thinking I wanted to get into that area, but now I'm thinking more along the lines of game design.
I actually think The Sims could be used as an educational tool. I mean, I might not go that far, but I think it could be used in a classroom. I mean, you have to pay bills, you have to take care of your children if you have them. I mean, it's a lot better than the egg and flower babies that they gave you in 8th grade.
Gosh, if I was only a Sim, I could have all of those things.
Think of the infinite possibilities of that. It'd be awesome.
I flew in the sea, I flew in the flea.
First of all, I want to thank all the fans out there that have spent time playing The Sims, and especially those that have created custom content or websites for the game, because I think that the creativity that you invest in this game is by far and away the largest component or reason for success. And I think internally at Maxis here, we're thinking more and more that we're not so much building games, to sell, but we're trying to build communities. The games become the kind of the nucleus around which the community forms, but really the business we want to be in is the business of building these creative communities of people that can create interesting, cool content and then share that amongst each other. In that sense, I view our games kind of more almost as a hobby and less of kind of a dramatic experience like a movie, because the story that you're experiencing in a game like The Sims really is the story that you put into it, the story that you tell, not the story that we are telling you. And so it's very interesting to us, what we can do to help you be more creative, to increase the creative potential of what you can do telling a story in these games. And, we get a lot of feedback from you, the fans, through websites, from our message boards, and even from our Sims Exchange, seeing the stories that you tell. And we're continually looking for ways to where we can kind of give you more creative freedom. And so whenever we see that exhibited, when we see the cool creative stuff that you make or use the games for, that's what's really motivating us to make these things.